On Tuesday, the city of Beirut in Lebanon was rocked by a massive explosion. It was so powerful it registered as an earthquake, and it was felt over 150 miles away. I'm Chris James, filling in for Carl Azuz, and I want to get you up to speed on what's happening in Beirut. The initial explosion looked like a mushroom cloud going up into the air. The state news agency originally said it was a fireworks warehouse, but it was later announced that the explosion took place at a warehouse holding confiscated ammonium nitrate, an incredibly combustible material. It's been reported that it was holding over 2,700 tons of it. The Beirut blast caused staggering and tragic destruction, killing over 100, with thousands more injured. The explosion left devastation stretching for miles. Beirut's governor announced that over 300,000 residents can't sleep in their own homes. Countries from all over the world have offered help and services. This is all coming on the heels of a country still grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic, and its health resources were already stretched thin. The Lebanese prime minister announced that Wednesday would be a day of mourning for the country. We're sending our love and thoughts to the people of Lebanon as they grapple with this enormous tragedy. If you're watching this right now, that means you have a working internet plan, or at the very least, you're using your phone's data. For students in other countries, that's not always the case. Take Bolivia, for example. The South American country has many parts of it that are still quite rural and often lack internet connections. In fact, most students don't have access to online learning. And now, with coronavirus cases rising, the country has decided to outright cancel school for the whole year. But where does that leave the students? CNN's Patrick Ottman investigates.
Riding from town to town in rural Bolivia, one teacher tried to keep his students from falling behind.
7 menos 1?
6.
His students were at a rare advantage, as most in rural areas were unable to continue classes once schools closed during the pandemic. Now the gap in access will affect students across the country as education ends for the rest of the year.
The school year is canceled because the vast majority of rural areas do not have internet. The children do not have internet. The fiber optic system, unfortunately, only reaches the city.
Usually in school from February to November, some 2 million students in Bolivia now can't attend class in person or online. Officials say they were left with no other choice. Reopening schools presented a health risk, as Bolivia's new daily coronavirus cases continues to climb. But virtual learning would leave tens of thousands behind.
It's not a good outlook, but we understand that, and we're making changes in the immediate future to leave the next government with a base for educational transformation.
UNICEF reports only 40% of Bolivian students are able to take classes online, as the pandemic adds pressure to increase internet and computer access around the highland nation. But as other countries find creative solutions, some residents feel Bolivia is giving up too easily.
The children haven't learned anything, and it's terrible for the teachers to work virtually. But the cancellation is worse because it's a total loss for the students. I don't think it's right.
As the coronavirus pandemic deepens across Latin America, so too does its impact on learning, as Bolivia's students face a near future without education. Patrick Ottman, CNN.
Time for 10-second trivia. Who was the first U.S. president to serve in the Navy? John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Harry Truman, or Gerald Ford? JFK. He was the first of an eventual 6 presidents to serve in the U.S. Navy. JFK started his naval career all the way back in 1941. He was one of many young men that were being shipped away to fight in World War II across Europe and the Pacific. Meanwhile, women were taking up the war effort back at home. When we think back to this time, it's easy to just assume all women were like the iconic image of Rosie the Riveter, working hard to make supplies and machinery. But there's a whole group of women that had to stay silent about their actual roles for so long. One of these women is 99-year-old Judy Parsons, and she was a code breaker.
We were told we would be hung at the gallows. They really laid it on thick that we were not to talk. I never told my husband, I never told anybody. My name is Judy Parsons, and I was in World War II as a code breaker.
Not many civilians know it, but a large number of Navy jobs are now open to women.
In the spring of '43, I went off and joined the Waves. We were shuffled into the chapel and sat there, and someone came in and said, did anybody know German? And I said, well, I took 2 years in high school, and so that was it. They shoveled me down then to the Op 20G, they called it, which was the German submarine traffic.
Op 20G at Nebraska Avenue in Washington, D.C. That's where most of the code breaking took place after 1943 on German codes and ciphers.
It was strictly cryptanalysis, trying to decode the Enigma machine.
And Enigma is the most difficult problem in the world.
No, Enigma isn't difficult, it's impossible. Everyone thinks Enigma is unbreakable.
Bletchley Park, of course, has entered the realm of myth and popular memory, but in fact, after 1943, most of that work was really being done at Nebraska Avenue by waves like Judey. In many respects, we should consider Nebraska Avenue the U.S. Navy's Bletchley Park. With the start of the Second World War, the British were able to develop a machine called the bomba.
We just called it the machine room.
What it was able to do is process information encrypted in Enigma.
I went into the crib room because the cribs were the clues to decipher the code. But we had to get about a line of type to get something to put in the machine.
The bomba machine would basically check each of the different variations, and it would spit out individual letters in the context of a message. It's like Wheel of Fortune at that point.
And then they would send these slips of paper back to us in the crib room.
And you start to analyze the letter and the construct of the message, and eventually you're able to sort of decipher what the message actually says.
If it worked, it broke the code for the day. If it didn't work, we'd wait for the next one to come because the machine spat out a lot of these slips of paper.
Judey was one of the analysts who was correlating information, and then that information would be conveyed down to Maine Navy in downtown Washington, D.C. They would then plot the information in the submarine tracking room to locate and eventually target individual submarines. So it was part of a bigger sort of machine that the U.S. Navy created, and you were a part of that.
Looking back on it, I wonder how we all had the patience to do it, but we did it.
Throughout the world, throngs of people hailed the end of the war in Europe.
After the war, the Navy thanked us profusely and sent us home, and it was back to the kitchen. It was kind of a blow to my pride to not be able to talk about it because everybody assumed I was a secretary. I would love to have said I had such a good job you wouldn't believe, but I couldn't say that.
The work that you did helped win the war. It's actually a great privilege for a historian like myself, and so I really appreciate your taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, it's my pleasure. I enjoy talking about it. There's just nobody to talk about it with. It was an interesting time to be alive, I'll say that.
Y'all remember Grumpy Cat, right? The cat that launched hundreds of memes with its one-of-a-kind face? Well, get this. There's a new sourpuss in town, Judgey Cat. Judgey Cat, whose real name is Roger, took quite a sassy photo when he was put up for adoption through the Arizona Humane Society. He really perfected his side-eye and even had a bit of attitude to boot, and thus Judgey Cat was born. But don't worry, Roger has already found a forever home where he can judge his days away. What a perfect way to end our show today. Okay, that pun was clawful. Guys, thanks so much for letting me spend the week with you. CNN 10 will be off for a couple days, and Carl Azuz will return with new episodes and better puns on August 12th. Be sure to check back in for some exciting new content. For CNN, I'm Chris James. Thanks again.